Kaikeyi, Chapter 9. The trip to the marketplace woke me from the depressed fog I had been living in. I began asking questions of Mantra. Can we go back? Can I go as myself? Are there other markets? Could I arrange a formal visit? I knew I could not navigate the chaos alone, but Mantra promised me that we would work out a plan. But before we could, she came back to me with a different sort of news. Dasharath had decided to challenge the warlord in the north. Radhini Kaushalya, first among the wives, hated the war camps and had refused the Raja's invitation to accompany him. Sumitra never even entertained the idea of going. But a war camp sounded exhilarating to me. So when Dasharath requested my presence in his chambers at the end of the week, I was prepared. Mantra chose a forest green sari for me, one that lay soft and pliant against my body, and an attendant younger even than I wrapped my body in the gauzy fabric, lined my eyes with kohl, and decorated me with strands of delicate golden jewelry that I knew to be lovely, but to me just felt tiresome. Dasharath did not so much as look at me when I entered the room, but thankfully years of living in the same palace as my father had inured me to such treatment. I simply stood quietly, contemplating the golden cord that stretched between us in the binding plane. Ah, Kaikeyi, he said at last, as if only just noticing me there. I wish to speak to you. Yes, Raja, I replied, keeping my head bowed. I grasped our cord firmly in my mind. It was the same thickness as my smallest finger. I am headed off to battle in a few days. The warlord Sambarasura has become too greedy, too arrogant. It is time for me to put him in his place. That is all, he added, when I did not respond. Have you nothing to say to me? I met his eyes, opened my mouth, and discovered that words could not come out. Despite Mantra's information, I found myself tongue-tied. Dasharath's face fell. He turned away from me. You may go then, he said, and the rudeness of the dismissal shook me from my stupor. Take me with you, I blurted inelegantly. Dasharath turned back around in shock. My king, I added, sending waves of deference and longing through our golden connection. Please, it would be an honor to accompany you. He squinted at me, then reached out and grasped my chin, tilting my head side by side, as if searching for something. You wish to come to the camps? Yes, I said softly. They're filled with men, soldiers, far cruder and baser than you're used to. I held my tongue, for now was not the time to remind him that I had been raised with 7 brothers and had heard many crude and base things. I can bear it for the honor of staying by your side. Pretty words, flattery, such things may have been the art of women, but they were the weakness of powerful men. A well-placed strum of the cord between us with my mind certainly did not hurt my case. Very well, he said slowly. I will consider your request. He kissed me then and led me to his bed. When he was spent and we were lying beside each other, Dasharath raised himself on an elbow to look at me. You may come with me to the battle, he said gruffly, and you may spend the night here if you wish. I wanted nothing more than to leave, to race barefoot to the women's quarters and climb into my own bed alone, but I mustered a small smile. You honor me, Raja. I will gladly stay by your side. Soon Dasharath's breath turned soft and even, and I turned my back to him. I willed myself someplace else in a vast field in Kaikeyi, astride my fastest horse, and as the imaginary wind whipped through my hair, I found brief haven in sleep's dominion. I awoke the next day before Dasharath and slipped away. He did not like the company in the morning, and I did not want to risk his good favor. I found my way back to my chambers without incident and sat on the edge of my bed, stroking the cool silk cover beneath my hands. Ah, there you are, Mantra's voice came from the next room. I jumped despite myself. Mantra, I called out. Who else would it be? She replied, walking into my bedroom. When you did not return last night, I assumed you would be accompanying Raja Dasharath today. I took the liberty of packing your garments and ensuring that a palanquin would be prepared. Why? Of course. There was no point in protesting to Mantra, who did not have the power to change this arrangement. In Kaikeyi, palanquins were used only for the elderly and the sick, and it would have brought my father great shame to see me riding in one. But here a Radhni would never be allowed to ride off on a horse. With a sudden goal, I thought of Yutajit, imagining how he would have laughed at my predicament. I banished that thought from my mind and rose. Do you know when we depart? He told me nothing. Because you need to know nothing. Mantra put her hands on my shoulders. You're a Radni now. Do not worry yourself with details. You managed the hardest part. You persuaded the Raja to take you with him. All the rest leave to me. We will depart in a few hours. And what am I to do once we get there? Dasharath will be fighting. Am I to manage his camp? Mantra shook her head. His soldiers will handle that. You are simply there to provide your husband some comfort. That sounded incredibly boring. Perhaps Mantra sensed my hesitation because she added, was there something else you wanted to do? Now that she asked me, I felt foolish. I want to fight alongside him. I know how, and I'm not some wilting flower. Rather than laughing at me, Mantra only looked thoughtful. I've heard that the Raja Dasharath has recently grown dissatisfied with his charioteer. He feels that the man is more interested in proving himself with extraordinary maneuvers than listening to commands. Mantra had deftly created her own circle of servants from which she gathered information for me. And for this I was grateful. You believe the Raja will allow me to be his charioteer? I believe that you could convince him. I closed my eyes and allowed myself for a moment to imagine standing at the front of a war chariot, steering Dasharath out of danger, creating opportunities for him to destroy his enemies. I was an excellent charioteer. Even Yutajit had said so, and he did not give praise lightly. We had honed my gift with years of practice. I could feel the slaps of the reins in my hands, hear the rhythm of the wheels against the ground. A soft bump against the door startled me out of my reverie. Mantra had vanished to secure something or other from my bedroom, so I opened it myself. Radni Sumitra, I forced myself to smile and gesture her in. How are you? She asked. She had not come to see me in months. But unlike Kaushalya, she at least gave me a kind smile or word in quote. I am well, and you? I resisted the urge to fidget with my dress. I just came by to wish you a safe and blessed trip, she said, staring at my feet. I squinted at her, surprised she already knew. She looked up at me and gave me a small smile. It wasn't hard to guess. You seem suited for it. Suited for it? I echoed blankly. Her face fell slightly. Well, I suppose I've never been north, but from what I've heard. She took a deep breath to stop the torrent of words and started again. I wanted to wish you well for your trip. It's very kind of you to accompany Dasharath. Thank you, I stuttered. I've never gone myself, she continued with a shudder. It was too much for me. Kaushalya used to go, but she felt it was. Sumitra trailed off, but I could guess what she meant. Beneath her, not ladylike, unrefined. My cheeks grew hot. I considered shoving her, as I used to do to my brothers, or making a snide remark. But instead, I remembered my evenings practicing with Mantra for welcoming guests in Kaikeyi. Sumitra could give me veiled insults, and I would prove to her that I could receive them with a smile. I'm glad to be of help, I said instead. Thank you for the kind wishes. We reached the fields of battle within a week. The Indra Mountains loomed over us, rising up beyond the vast plains of rippling yellow grass, stark and foreboding against the pale skies. Sambarasura and Dasharath had agreed to fight here, in the flatlands, one army against the other for supremacy. I did not see much value in communicating intentions so clearly, but my people were considered half barbaric in the western kingdoms for our war methods, so I did not voice such apprehensions to anybody. The only company I had on the long trip was a young handmaiden named Asha. She had a round, cheerful face and wore her hair in two thick oiled braids down her neck. Ordinarily, Asha was in the service of Radni Kaushalya, but the Raja had requested her presence for me. I worried Asha might hate me, as Kaushalya obviously did, but to my surprise she did not seem to. Each night, she arranged my hair and dabbed my face, and although I hated it, she made me look more lovely than I ever had. Her clever fingers coaxing my hair to fall just so, and each day the leaf green braid between us thickened with a new strand. Before my nights with Dasharath, I had evenings when the soldiers set up camp and Dasharath busied himself with his advisors discussing strategy. Recalling my rides with Yutajit, I used this time to slip away in the twilight gloom and visit the master of horses. Ashwasin was a grizzled man who had once been the charioteer to Dasharath's father. His long brown hair was streaked through with grey, and though he walked with stiffness and spoke with a certain gruffness, Dasharath still found him indispensable. The first night I told him I simply wished to spend time with the horses. They remind me of home, I said. And as I did, I took a brush from one of the servants and began tending to a large brown stallion. He observed me for a moment, arms crossed. "It's dirty work," he said at last. "I don't mind," I murmured, and truly I didn't. Standing here, one hand rubbing the horse's warm flank, as the other gently worked, was the most like myself I had felt in some time. "You've done a fine job caring for them," I said. "My father's own would not be treated better." At this, his face softened slightly. He walked away, but as he did, a friendly brown thread materialized between us in the binding plane. The next day, he offered me a ride on one of the smaller horses, a dappled grey mare, and I accepted eagerly. Our bond thickened without my even noticing it, so that when I checked it on the third evening, it had developed into a supple wood-like bow. One of my first true connections in Ayodhya. That evening, I asked to see the king's chariot, fully prepared to use the binding plane if needed. But magic proved unnecessary. Ashwasin led me to it willingly. We discussed the chariot's properties at length, and he appeared suitably impressed by my knowledge. On the fourth night, I asked him if I might drive the chariot, just for a few moments to ensure everything was in order. He was reluctant at first, but I told him how Yutajit's chariot had once lost a wheel during one of his first skirmishes, and I added a gentle push in the binding plane. He gave in, harnessing the team and cautioning me to drive no farther than a short stretch of dirt road. The chariot was magnificent, with massive wooden wheels and a beautifully curved partition between charioteer and warrior. I stood in the front, knees bent slightly for balance. As I wielded the reins, I pretended that a warrior stood behind me, loosing a volley of arrows, each hitting their mark, guided by a smooth motion of the wheels. And life surged through me. Something of my old spirit came back to me with every second I drove those horses. I longed to race off farther down the path, to race away into the distance, to some unknown future. Instead, I obeyed Ashwasin's parameters, finishing a loop in barely a minute. "The left back wheel is indeed loose," I said as I carefully hopped down. "Kaikeyi is an excellent charioteer," I told him in our connection, watching as the thought raced along the relaxed curve of the bond, like a reflection on polished wood. The fifth evening, the master of horses sought me by asking Asha to relay a message to me. I barely met him an hour later, buoyant and eager, and he handed me the reins of the chariot, already prepared for riding. "Try a few maneuvers," he said. "I wish to watch." He had attached two powerful Madhuvan bays to the chariot in a field at the edge of the camp. I set them in motion with a flick of my wrist, then pulled them to a quick stop. A fierce grin spread across my face at their responsiveness. I could not erase it as I imagined a battlefield before me. Instincts from the obstacle courses Yutajit and I once raced through came rushing back, and I urged them forward, riding down soldiers separated from the pack. Then I brought the horses to a sudden halt so the Raja could launch a spear. The moment he let it fly, I brought the horses into a tight circle, fleeing from an enemy chariot bearing down upon us. I slowed our pace while they were in pursuit, so they passed us, turning from hunters into hunted. Then with a cry, I urged the horses to charge down the gap. I imagined Dasharath leaning out of the chariot and carving through enemies with his khanda. I lost myself in the feeling of movement, of power, until a familiar voice pierced through my happiness. "Kaikeyi!" "Dasharath." I pulled the horses to a halt. In the binding plane, our golden thread vibrated dangerously. I dismounted, wind-swept and sweating, nearly stumbled in my haste, and dipped into a shaky bow. "Raja." The bond between us jittered. I focused on sending waves of calming energy across our link, though I was hardly calm myself. In that moment, it occurred to me that perhaps I had been misusing the plane in Ayodhya. In Kekaya, where all my bonds had been once solid and sure, it was easy to send suggestions and accomplish my goals. So that was all I did, but I did not have that luxury here. So perhaps instead I should try to strengthen the bond ever so slightly rather than using it to influence. It would not help me immediately, but over time, my mind rushed with adrenaline, crystallizing the idea. And as the bond between me and Dasharath began to quiet, I suddenly noticed a third thread, fully unconnected to me. I blinked and it disappeared. I blinked again and it reappeared more solid than ever. A thick maroon cable connected Dasharath and the master of horses. As I focused my attention upon it, Dasharath turned to Ashwasan, who was smiling smugly. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. His face was thunderous. "Your Radni comes from a kingdom renowned for their riders and their war horses. I sought to consult her on such matters to ensure everything was in order for you," he lied. Their bond was the width of a forearm and rippled with vitality. Clearly, they held each other in high esteem. Could I manipulate that cord? I wondered, even though it is not connected to me. "And why is the Radni driving a chariot?" Dasharath demanded. I tried to grasp their cord with my mind, but it slipped away from me, disappearing for good. "She has a talent for it. You watched her just as I did. Did you not agree, my Raja?" He was far more brazen than I could ever be. I hid my amusement as Dasharath opened and closed his mouth, unable to find a response. Finally, he turned to me. "Where did you learn to drive like that?" "My brother Yutajit," I said, averting my eyes in a poor missile of humility. Our golden cord had fully calmed, so I knew there was little danger of it breaking. When I was a child, he included me in his games and lessons. I apologize if I have caused you any offense. Offense? Dasharath closed his eyes. "You drive better than my own charioteer." "Thank you," I said demurely, hoping my triumphant pleasure was not evident in my face. "You were looking to replace him," said the master of horses. "I think you have found your match." He walked out towards the chariot and began unhooking the team, as if the discussion had already ended. "My match," Dasharath repeated, as if pondering the words. And then, "I do not wish to ask you to risk your life for me." I met his eyes, and there was no anger there. The heat of battle is no place for a woman. You would not be wielding a weapon. The gods forbid that, and we would not disobey them. But it is still dangerous. But Ashwasan is right. You're excellent. Would you be my charioteer? I accept. I had to force myself to modulate my voice. I did not think my husband would appreciate my shouting with excitement. "Yes, I will gladly stay by your side." As I said, the thread between us thickened into a chain of metal, and the smile that crept onto my face was entirely genuine. The following evening, Ashwasan had put me through my paces, conscripting other soldiers on horseback, so that I might practice formations. The men all respected Dasharath so deeply that they were surprised at their Raja's decision. They did not show it or question it. They approached the task with discipline and rigidity. Despite the rigors of the tiring practice on the appointed day of battle, I woke before Dasharath, before even Asha lifted the flap of my tent. She had somehow managed to procure a set of men's breeches and armor, and we had spent the past 2 days furiously fitting them onto my body. I slipped them on and beamed. I could finally move comfortably. When I had made the request, I worried that my bond with her would fray from my unladylike conduct. Instead, it had grown stronger. "You look excellent, my lady," she said now. "It suits you." "It suits me," I repeated. Sumitra had said something quite similar just a week ago. Was Asha mocking me as well? Had I judged her too highly? But when I checked the binding plane, I found no evidence of the cloudiness of deceit that I had come to recognize on some cords. "I only meant you wear it well, not that you are suited to men's clothing. My apologies. You look excellent in anything." Her voice and face painted a picture of perfect sincerity. You have done a masterful job on this in such a short time, I said by way of apology. Perhaps when we return to Ayodhya, you might create a similar suit for me, in a more feminine material. They can be my riding clothes. You would wear breeches in the city? Asha looked me up and down, and I tried not to show any trace of self-consciousness. I would wear breeches that looked to others like normal women's clothing, if you are up to such a task. Asha was missing a front tooth and unafraid to show it in a smile. Very well, lady, survive the battle and I will make you breeches. Sambarasura is a minor warlord, I scoffed. I am not afraid of him. In truth, he was more than that. He had carved a small kingdom for himself, which took willpower and steel at the very least. But there was no room for me to let fear in here. She shook her head. Do not underestimate him, my lady. I have heard he is a formidable warrior. She bent her head. Lord Vishnu, please protect Radni, Kaikeyi and Raja Dasharath and the armies of Koshala. Allow the righteous to prevail. I gazed at her bent head. Would prayers made for me fall into the empty void as prayers made by me? Only Mantra had ever mentioned praying for me, so I had no way of knowing, but I appreciated Asha's sentiment all the same. I had heard that the gods of war had long favoured Koshala, allowing them to emerge victorious in battle after battle, ensuring the kingdom was the largest in the land. My presence could not change that, I hoped. The sun had not yet risen, but by now the men were stirring in the camp. I made my way to where the master of horses waited for me. I spoke to each of the animals in turn, stroking their manes, being with them, working with my hands, and doing something useful calmed my fraying nerves. I harnessed Dasharath's team myself, inspecting every turn of the chariot. Then I watched the bloody sunrise as I waited for the battle to begin.